Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today on the bench, we have a Chinese manufactured movement made by Dixmont. This is the DG2813. Now, I've already disassembled the watch. I've cleaned all the parts, and now we're ready to start the installation. Now, this is not a movement that would normally be serviced. They're pretty inexpensive, but one of the problems with movements like this is that they don't get lubricated properly. So we want to see what we can do to make it work a little bit better. So to start with in the disassembly, the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to treat the escape wheel in Epilam. If you're not familiar with Epilam, this is a surface coating that's applied basically to keep lubricants in the location that you apply them. Now on the pallet jewels, the Epilam is only going to get applied to the jewels and not the entire pallet fork. Since this is an automatic movement, we're going to start off by lubricating the walls of the barrel. I like to use Kluber P125. And we're just going to lay a very thin layer around the barrel wall. With the mainspring installed into the mainspring winder, I just gently insert it into the barrel. Now with the mainspring installed, I can turn my attention to the barrel arbor. Now there's a couple ways to do it. I like to use a barrel arbor pin vise to hold it while I insert it in. So we're going to start with a little HP 1300 lubrication and just put a thin film around the barrel arbor where it goes into the bottom of the barrel drum. So now we insert the arbor into the barrel drum, and I like to give it just a little twist to make sure that the hook caught onto the mainspring. Now I'm just releasing the arbor from the pin vise, and now we can lubricate the top part of the arbor that's going to come in contact with the barrel lid. I'm also using HP 1300 as well. So we can go ahead and put the lid on, and then we can press it down until we get the snap that the lid is shut. Now, on this movement, before you install the barrel, you need to install the center wheel, or the second wheel. So since this is a slow-moving wheel under a lot of torque, again, we're going to use the HP 13. So we'll put a little bit of oil on the extended arbor, and then we'll put a little bit more oil on the upper pivot that's going to sit in the jewel. And now let's go ahead and just put the second wheel in place. Just like that. Now, before we install the barrel, we're going to again use HP 1300, and we'll put a small amount on the bottom pivot as well as the top pivot. And we can go ahead and drop that in place. And there we are. Our barrel teeth are meshed with the pivot on the center wheel. And now we can install the center wheel bridge. Sorry, I'm a little out of the camera frame. I was trying to see what I was doing, so I apologize for that. There are two screws that hold the bridge in position. Now with the bridge in place, we can install the seconds pivot. This is what carries the seconds hand. It's essentially just a long arbor with a pinion on the end. So we'll give it a little 90-10 since this is going to be a fast-moving pivot or fast-moving arbor. And it just fits right into the tube of the center wheel. So now we flip over the movement and we'll start installing part of the keyless works. Just fitting the stem into the plate. Now we're just applying a little bit of HP 1300 to the pivot at the end that sits into the plate and just turning it around a little bit to distribute the lubrication. This is where the hack lever is going to sit into the movement. I'm just applying a little bit of grease to where the spring is going to be sitting. The spring does move back and forth at this location, or this part of the plate. So I just like to have a little grease to cut down a little bit on any kind of wear from friction that there might be. And there, the hacking lever is in place. Now under the setting lever, which we'll be installing in just a second, there's a pin that comes in contact with the hacking lever. So I just lubricate that point of contact. And then on the stem where it spins inside the main plate, I'm just going to apply a little bit of grease at the contact points and then turn the stem just to distribute the lubrication as well. Now on the square part of the stem, we're just installing just a tiny bit of HP 13. Now we're going to add a little bit of lubrication to the setting lever post. This is the post that sits into the movement that the setting lever sits on. This is what you push onto to release the stem from the movement itself. And we'll go ahead and put that in place. Now we have the yoke that's going to sit in the sliding pinion. And these are the notches that the post from the setting lever will slide back and forth in. So since it's a friction spot, two pieces of metal sliding against each other, I like to use a grease there. And you can see the yokes going in. The post goes on the bottom side of the hacking lever spring. And as you can see, as the yoke moves back and forth, it will pull the hacking lever up to actually stop the balance from spinning. Now I'm just applying just a touch of grease to the post where the setting lever is going to be sitting on. And just making sure that the stop pin is in the groove on the stem. And then we can put the setting lever in its position in the yoke. Now this is the yoke maintaining plate. This is what holds the hacking lever, the yoke, and the setting lever in position. This is just held on with 2 screws. Next, we have the setting lever jumper. Now, the part that I'm lubricating here actually sits on the setting lever. It's the spring that gives the setting lever pin tension when you're pushing in the pin to release the stem, and then lubricating the notches in the setting lever jumper that slide across the pin on top of the setting lever, effectively holding the setting lever in position. It's held on by one screw. And I'm just popping the setting lever jumper into position and just checking the action of the setting lever itself. Now we're going to flip the movement back over and we're going to install the sliding pinion. Now, this is an interesting arrangement. Normally in watches that I see, the sliding pinion and winding wheel are two separate pieces. But in this one, it's actually a one-piece sliding pinion. So to install it, I just released the stem, slid it into position, and now we're going to add a little bit of HP 1300 to lubricate the contact point of the yoke. Next, I'm going to put in an intermediate winding wheel. So I'm just lubricating the post for it with a little HP 1300. And this transfers the winding motion from the sliding arbor to the ratchet wheel. Now I'm installing the third wheel. I'll apply the lubrication for the other wheels in the train once the bridge is put in place. Now I'm installing the fourth wheel. And of course, the escape wheel goes in last. Well, that was the easy part of this side of the movement. The next two wheels are part of the automatic winding assembly. And I found that putting the bridge on with the three train wheels plus these two wheels was pretty difficult to say. I mean, it's 5 pivots that have to get into their holes on completely different sides of the movements. So needless to say, I'm not a big fan of the automatic winding system in this DG2813. It was really hard to get these lined up. To complicate the installation of the bridge even more, there's a spring in the center that pushes down on the second-hand arbor that's in the middle of the plate. So that's the one thing that I will tell you is I don't have any real good advice on how to do it. You just got to take your time and eventually you'll get it. So this is the second intermediate wheel that's built into the plate. So I didn't take this off when I washed the other parts, so I just took it apart and relubricated it. This is what transfers the energy from the first intermediate wheel for the hand winding function. So here's my attempt to put this bridge on. Again, you have to push down on the center, the spring, while you maneuver these 5 pivots into place. And you just got to take your time. I imagine if you did it, a dozen times or so that it would become easier, but to be quite honest, it's not the best design I've ever seen. So here I'm just checking the different pivots. The whole process took probably about 5 minutes, but eventually I got them in, and now I can put the screws down to hold the bridge in place. So now I'm just rotating the barrel to make sure that all the pivots are in place and checking the wheels on the automatic works to see if everything's in place, and it appears to be. So now I can move on to lubricating the rest of the jewels in the train. So for the slow moving wheels, which in this case is going to be the third wheel, I'll use the HP 1300. And then on the faster moving wheels, like the fourth wheel and escape wheel, those get lubricated with a touch of Mobius 9010. Now we're just lubricating the jewels on the dial side. And now we'll go ahead and install the pallet fork. Now the pallet fork bridge on this watch is just held by 2 steady pins and 1 screw. So once I get the pivots in place, we can go ahead and tighten the screw down. Now I'm just going to give the watch a little wind to the mainspring and check the action between the pallet forks and the escape wheel. That looks right. And now I can install the balance wheel. Now the object here is to have the impulse jewel slide into the slot of the pallet fork. That's why we start off with it at an angle and we turn the movement holder so that the impulse stone slides into the slot of the pallet fork. Now I can usually just give it a little shake and it comes to life just like that. Now the bridge for the balance wheel is held in with 2 steady pins to align the bridge correctly and 1 screw. So we'll just go ahead and tighten that down. And now I'm just winding up the movement to get the balance wheel spinning. And now we can move on to lubricating the balance jewels. I found that the best way to open the jewels is just with a good sharp pair of tweezers. And open the arms up and pick up the balance jewel right out of the setting. Now once they're separated, I do put them in a jar of hexane to swirl them around a little bit to clean them up. And now holding the end stone or cap jewel, we just put a small dot of 9010 right in the center. And we really want to shoot for about 50% coverage. And then when we add the cap back on, the capillary action of the oil will keep it in place. So you see we can just turn it around and the cap jewel is in the setting perfectly. And now we can put it back into the watch. So now we're on the balance bridge jewel. And then we could just close it up again with our tweezers. And now I'll flip over the movement so I can do the jewel on the dial side. And again, same thing, just slowly, gently pry the arms of the spring open. And then you can just reach in with some sharp tweezers and pull the setting right out. Now, this particular one, the cap jewel didn't come out easy. So I just take a thin wire and I can stick it through the pivot hole and just pop the jewel out. That's a little bit of hexane I just put on the watchmaker paper. Then I can scrub the jewel to get any residual oil off of it. So we want to start with a perfectly clean jewel. And that one looks pretty clean. And now we're ready to oil. Just again, a little dollop of oil right in the center. We're shooting again for about 50, 60% coverage. And now this one's ready to put back into the movement as well. You can see I almost lost the spring there. I just had to stop for a second and straighten it back out. No problem. We just keep going. One of the hardest parts of a watch to lubricate is the pallet jewels. Here I'm just applying a small amount of lubricant to the impulse face of the pallet jewel itself. And then we'll advance the teeth by 3 teeth. And what this does is you can see that it's dragging off a little bit of the lubricant on each tooth. And then we go back and lubricate it again. And we'll continue to do this for all 15 teeth on the escape wheel. Since we use the epilam to treat the escape wheel and the pallet fork jewels, we let the watch run for approximately 5 to 8 minutes. And what that does is it'll wear off the epilam off the edge of the teeth on the escape wheel, and it will wear a stripe right down the center of each jewel, removing the epilam from the areas that we actually want the lubrication to stick to. All right, now we'll finish up the dial side. This is the date indicator driving wheel. It will sits in a little hole, pivot hole. We'll lubricate that with a little HP 1300. Now, before we install the minute wheel, you'll notice there's a little raised ring that runs around the area that's going to be under the minute wheel. Well, the minute wheel actually rides on this ring, so I'm using a little bit of Mobius 9504 to lubricate it. And what we'll do is I spin it around, and if you look at the underside of the wheel, you can actually see where the grease has made the ring around it. So that's a pretty important lubrication spot. This is all going to be HP 1300. This is the extended arbor from the center wheel. This is the post that the intermediate wheel sits on. And get the intermediate wheel in place. Now installing the cannon pinion. And this wheel drives the date indicator driving wheel from the hour wheel. So now just a little bit more 1300 and installing the hour wheel. So the motion train is complete. Just checking the function. Everything looks fine. Now the quick date change system is kind of interesting. It's a little different from what you'll see. This is actually the spring for it. It's just held down by one screw. Now, not only is the sliding arbor combined with the sliding pinion in this caliber, but there's also two tabs that rotate on the stem that I'm lubricating right now. And these tabs, they rotate around when you're doing your quick date change function, and they hit the arm on this piece. Now, I'm not sure what they call this piece because there's no tech sheet for this movement, but you'll see in a moment how that works. And then the third piece connects to that one, which again I don't know what they call it, but it sits on this post, and that's basically the 3 or 4 components of the quick date chain system. Now I'm going to install the date jumper. So a little bit of just a touch of oil on that post. Now we need to install the date jumper spring, and it is a little tiny small one for sure. And it's got a very shallow little lip that it sits on. So you got to be real careful putting this in. And now we can take the date indicator, just lay it in, and then we'll pull the date indicator jumper into its notch between the teeth. And we're just about done. This is the plate that holds it all together. It keeps all those pieces down, including the hour wheel, and it is held on by 3 screws. There's number 1 and number 2. And number 3. Now I'm just checking the quick date function, and that seems to work perfectly fine. And then we'll check the date function as the wind comes around for 24 hours, and that looks fine. Well, anyway, guys, if you have a DG2813 and you can't find a tech sheet, well, that's how you put it together. I appreciate you joining me today. Until next time, we'll see you later.